coming from a traditional Chinese household, I said, I'm out. I don't expect you to be out. Do you know what I mean? Like, I understand that. Like, I understand it's difficult for you. It took me a long time to figure out, right? It took me a long time to figure out who I was and how I wanted to love in this world and who I wanted to love in this world. I would want to give the same patience and understanding and compassion to my parents as I would want from them.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Pride Talk. And for those that may be new to us, Pride Talk is a podcast presented by Nap Pride. Our podcast features in-depth conversations with Asian American LGBTQ plus professionals and our allies. Today, we continue our intimate conversation with Broadway star and Gaysian extraordinaire Telly Leung. I'm sure you all want to hear more of his captivating story, so let's get to it. I'm your host, John Ong. And with me is co-host David Moore. Say hi, David.
Hi, all. Hope everyone is enjoying this fascinating conversation with Telly. I mean, we had such a great time talking with him. And honestly, I was really surprised at how open he was with us. And this episode gets really personal as we discuss identity, Calvin Klein underwear ads, his coming out experience, married life, and family acceptance. He also shares his experience with dating girls. Yeah, girls. And his first time having sex with a man.
Wait, did you say Calvin Klein underwear ads?
I did.
What does that have to do with Telly Leung's story?
Well, you're just going to have to listen to find out, aren't you?
Okay.
How do you, and we ask this to all our guests, is how do you self-identify as a member of the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't really come out till pretty late.
Mm-hmm.
I think, this generation, they're so lucky. I feel like I teach a lot of university students, and a lot of my college freshmen came out their freshman year in high school. That just wasn't, back when I was in high school in 1994.
Do tell.
That
Yes,
wasn't a
do
thing.
tell.
Yeah, it just wasn't a thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, and also I was so busy being a student.
Uh-huh.
I didn't really focus my energy on myself at all. And so in high school, I dated girls because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I took a girl to the prom because that's what I was supposed to do. And I had experiences with girls and all of that. And it wasn't really until college where I shifted my focus from academia to art. And in a lot of ways, my acting teachers challenged me. They said, in order to be a really good artist, you have to ask some really tough questions of yourself and of who you are and how you see the world and how you love. You can't lie to yourself. You have to be honest with yourself. And you also can't, you have to ask tough questions in order to get to the truth of the human spirit and of human behavior. And that's your job. Your job is to do that. Your job is to dig deeper and deeper and get to the truth of a character. And you cannot do that unless you have the balls and the courage to dig deep and find the truth within yourself. And so in a lot of ways, through my work, through being a good acting student, I was like, can I love someone who's a male? Can I love somebody who's a female? So I didn't come out till my senior year in college, really. So and in a lot of ways it was, I don't even know if I really saw it as something for myself at the moment. I was just trying to be a good artist. I was just trying to be a good actor. I was just trying to be a good student of the arts, right? Because I had been so programmed to be a good student since I was a little kid by my parents, that in a lot of ways, being that good student and being conscientious was what made me dig deep and ask those questions. Of course, now I've been with my husband for over 16 years. Like, I identify as gay, of course. That's how I identify now. But at the time, I definitely had a period of being very fluid. And I understand when people say that their sexuality is fluid. I definitely feel like I had a period when it was very fluid. And so I identify as gay now, for sure, because I've been with my husband for so long, with my husband, Jimmy, for 16 years.
Having, Asian parents, what was harder, I'm going to be in theater or I'm gay? Or were they supportive of both?
I always said it was much harder coming out as an actor than coming out as gay. Because I felt like coming out as an actor and saying, "Mom and Dad, I'm not going to go to Harvard and be a doctor."
Yeah.
And I'm gonna live my life as a gypsy. not knowing where my next paycheck's going to come from. I think that scared them. And by the time I came out and said, Mom and Dad, I think maybe I'm gay and I'm going to date boys, they were like, of course you are. You're an actor. Of course you are. That was literally the next response. Not to say that it wasn't hard for them. You know, I think my parents are, you know, I remember my, you know, it was very difficult. We sort of had a very don't ask, don't tell relationship for a long time, you know, and I think a lot of Asian people probably have that with their parents, that, you know, if we don't see it, it doesn't exist. Or if we don't acknowledge our child's love life, you know, because we don't approve, then it doesn't exist. Right. And I remember, you know, this was well into me being with Jimmy, and we had at this point already even bought an apartment together. We owned New York City real estate together, which to me is like, that's more of a commitment than, I mean, getting a mortgage with somebody to me in New York City is more than getting married. That's a bigger commitment, right?
Right.
And at some point, like my dad was super rude to Jimmy, you know, and I ultimately like had a moment which, you know, I never thought I would have, but I stood up to my dad and I said, Dad, you know, this is the person I'm gonna be with for a very long time. You can't be rude to this person. Like, you know, and my dad sort of had a very uncharacteristic emotional moment where he said, Telly, I just don't want you to be gay. I don't want you to be gay. I want my grandchild. I want you to have that life that I always dreamed of you having. And I said, well, Dad, that's great. I said, I that's wonderful that that's what you expected of me. I said, but you do understand that this very nice Chinese girl that I was supposed to marry and this nice Chinese grandchild that we were supposed to produce together, that this doesn't exist. Like, that's a fantasy of what you want from me that doesn't actually exist. I said, I'm your son. I'm here. I'm flesh and blood. I exist. So, and, you know, and I said this to my dad. I can't believe I said this to him in the heat of the moment, but I said, Dad, you know, you're not going to get any younger and you will die one day. Like, and you have a limited time. We have a limited time on this earth together. So you're going to spend that time with me, your son, loving your son, or you're going to spend that time loving the idea of what I was going to be. You know, and honestly, I think it took me being much more comfortable. Like, honestly, it took me my strength of being able to love somebody else and defend that person to really be able to stand up to my dad and go, this is who I am. And in a lot of ways, I know my dad didn't like hearing it in the moment, but I also know that deep down he respected that. I think deep down he recognized I might not understand this, you know, because I grew up in communist China, and according to the communists, there are no gay people in China. Do you mean? But like, you know, it wasn't something he understood, but I think he did understand me loving somebody enough to defend them in that moment.
Which part of that process did you have that conversation with your dad?
You know, it just got to a point where I had just had enough. You know,
was it just like you just don't talk about who Jimmy is?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, in a way, like I live such a busy life, and my schedule is so opposite of everybody's. Right, like I work at night, I get up late. You know, I'm always on the road. I'm always traveling, and you know, I'm always packing a suitcase and heading to the next gig, some concert, some shoot somewhere. Right, so I'm always on the road, and so it's easy. It's easy to not. When I do have the time with my parents, have small talk and go, are you doing all right? Yes, I'm fine. You know, are you eating enough? Yes. Do you have enough, you know, you have enough money? Yes, fine. You know, you sort of have the peripheral conversations, right?
Yeah.
And you can lead in New York City, you can be so busy that you can lead a whole separate life and them not know about it, even though they live in New York. Please, even me and my husband's a 9-to-5er and I'm an actor. We're on totally opposite schedules. Not right now. Coronavirus is actually on the same schedule, but, you know, we're trapped in our 500 square foot apartment together, happily trapped, but trapped nonetheless. But you know, it just wasn't. And finally, I just, you know, I just said, I can't have my father disrespecting this person I really love, and it really ultimately took me saying, you know, I love you unconditionally. You know, I know parents are supposed to love their children unconditionally, but I love you, Dad, unconditionally, and I can wait for you to come around and understand this. I can wait for you. I will wait for you. It is my job to wait for you. But I said, just so you know, if you're going to continue to be rude to the person that I have chosen to spend the rest of my life with, we're not going to spend very much time together. I'm not going to subject him to that. In the same way that if Jimmy was rude to you, I wouldn't bring him around you. So, you know, you choose how we spend this limited time together. The longer it takes for you to come around and get it, the less time we have, you know? In some ways, I did it mathematically, which I felt like was like the Asian way. If X happens, then Y happens. It became very
makes sense. And sometimes this conversation is coming from you, right? But it's good for a parent to hear that conversation, like what we're talking about, because they sometimes don't think about that. You know, sometimes they focus on how am I going to tell your uncle or your grandfather or whatever relative.
Yeah.
They don't.
Well, I said that, and listen, I get that. Like, again, coming from a traditional Chinese household, I said, I'm out. I don't expect you to be out. Do you know what I mean? Like, I understand that. Like, I understand it's difficult for you. It took me a long time to figure out, right? It took me a long time to figure out who I was and how I wanted to love in this world and who I wanted to love in this world. I would want to give the same patience and understanding and compassion to my parents as I would want from them, you know?
Yes.
And I think it is important for that person coming out to understand your parents have seen you even before you were conscious. They know you from the time you came out of the womb. They know you from the time you were a baby. And in so many ways, that's all they're going to see of you. So, you know, they have all of their hopes and dreams, you know, placed upon you. So that for the as many years as you've been alive, if not more, and that you have to have some patience with them to like rewrite that story in their brain,
right?
You know.
Now, you didn't come out until you were like senior in college, but what were your potential moments as a child that you're like, I should have picked up that little thing?
Maybe, I don't know, there's one in particular that I always think of. Like, I grew up in the 90s, so like those Mark Wahlberg, Calvin Klein ads were like everywhere. And like everybody was talking about them. Like, I don't know if it was like a sexual thing for me, but I certainly like they were everywhere in New York City. And like I looked all the time. I was like, yeah. I mean, I don't know if at the time I could place it as like sexually attractive, but I guess maybe that was. I don't know, maybe.
Caught your attention, but
maybe Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch. But then again, you couldn't get away from, you know, Mark Wahlberg and his undies in the 90s.
And who would want to, right?
Who would want to? Correct.
Yeah, because there were moments where I look back on my own childhood photos and all that. They were like super obvious moments.
Sure.
And I'm like, oh yeah.
But you know what? Here's the thing that gags me sometimes is meeting now. I mean, it's so fluid, right? Like now I meet super feminine guys who are in married, committed, healthy relationships with women now. You know, that like we've gone beyond that. Like for a little while we had like the metrosexual.
Yeah.
Now I feel like everybody's sort of metrosexual, and now I feel like, you know, it's like I meet guys who are super feminine, and you maybe when you first meet them, you think, oh, they're obviously gay, and then they're married with kids or whatever. You know what I mean? Like you just never, I never call it anymore. I probably have the worst gaydar. It probably started with myself, that I couldn't pick it up myself really. And that now I try not to assume when I meet somebody anymore. You know, I feel like families are what you make of them. And I certainly, you know, I mean, I feel like the New York theater community is chosen family, you know, and I feel like that is, and I think part of that too is I grew up as an only child, right? Like my parents couldn't really afford to have more than one kid. And like I said, they quit. They were like, we're going to quit while we're ahead. We have a son. Great. You know? So I didn't have brothers and sisters. That gave me the most active imagination in the world. I had imaginary friends. And when I got older, all I wanted was brothers and sisters to play with all the time. And so, of course, I enter the theater where every time I join a cast, I have brothers and sisters that I go home to every single night at the Broadway Theater, you know? So in a lot of ways, this idea of chosen family, of how we make family, of family units, of you know, who we deem to be the people that we want to spend our lives with. It's just, there's no one way of doing it anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And I sort of love that.
When you take away all the labels, it's a lot easier to connect with that person than it is just the label. You know?
Yeah. So it's interesting, like you know, knowing my own history, like that's why I always hesitate to say I'm gay, even though I am gay now, but spending, you know, having been committed to a man, but like I think we're all sort of fluid in a lot of ways, you know? If we really dig deep, we probably can love we love on so many levels. It's interesting. I've had a lot of friends in New York City. I don't know if this is a phenomenon that's happening in Kansas City, but polyamory is a really big thing now. Like the people are in what used to be called thruples, or you know what I mean, or like, but the idea of polyamory, of people being in committed relationships with more than one person.
Yeah.
And I actually cornered some friends who were in that relationship, and I asked them about it, and they said something that was so beautiful that stuck with me. They just said, "Why my love is infinite. My capacity to love is actually infinite, and why it's the idea, the structure that we've built, even in the gay community of." We're monogamous and we can only love one person. Who's to say that? I can love one person and love another person in as quantitatively and in the same kind of intensity, but completely differently as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a different place in my heart, and that the human being's capacity to love is infinite. And I kind of love that idea that we there's no way to love too much. You know, like. You can't max out. You can't max out on love.
Yeah, going back, like rewind back to your senior in college. Like, what were the things or things that you see, or events that happened that led you to thinking? I know you mentioned that your acting class asking you to question those things. So what led to your coming out?
Well, it's so interesting.
Juicy.
I dated a girl all through college. And so it wasn't until senior year where I said, could I date a boy? And I had a very good friend of mine that I went to college with who was a Mormon. He was a Mormon, and he was not out to his family in Utah at all. But he was out to all of us who were theater majors, and he was very gay. Like he to make money for college, he go-go danced on the weekends. And, I mean, like he was like super gay, you know? So, and in a lot of ways, he, as my friend, he was like, I compartmentalized. This is the person I am in Utah, and this is like Mormon me, and then there's like me who's in college and an artist, and I've compartmentalized it. So it was a crazy. And being, you know, a math science kid, I was like, hey, would you want to do an experiment? Can we just like, if you can compartmentalize it so much and it doesn't mean anything to you, can we hook up? That's how I answered all of those questions. It was super clinical to me, and I remembered you know, hooking up with this friend in college, and that's all it purely was. It was like, and I remembered like the first time that I enjoyed it. Right. The first time that I was able to like be with a man and like actually really enjoy it and like finish. Right. I broke down crying, because for me, it was that moment where I was like, oh, now my definition of myself and who I think I am is completely rocked. Right. Like I'm no longer really straight and questioning or curious. Now I'm like a whole other thing. What does that mean? And it like rocked my world. And in a way, it was actually awesome that I did it with my friend, because my friend, like in that moment, stopped being the person I was hooking up with and became my friend, and gave me a hug and like talked me through it and took me out to coffee. Do you know what I mean? Like, so in a way, like I sort of did it in a very clinical, experimental way. I know it's a little stereotypical to talk about it in such a math science way, but that's sort of how I had to filter it through. Like, this is a controlled experiment. I'm experimenting. This is what's happening. This is the process. I'm doing it with somebody that can separate, you know, the feelings, you know,
and you trust too. So that opened up the door for you. Then
it did.
It
opened up the possibilities for sure, and it opened up kind of what my definition of my of what love is, and my definition of what sex is, and all of that, and so and also my definition of what I expected of myself. I think so much of what I expected of myself was based on what my parents expected of me, right? So growing up in a traditional Chinese home and fulfilling all of those things that you're supposed to fulfill as an only Chinese son, you know, of having the next son to carry on the name, and the, you know, all the Chinese grandchildren you're supposed to deliver to your, you know, and all of a sudden I think that's why I broke down, really, was because I had to go, oh shit, that might not happen, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know. and I had to be okay with that.
Yeah, you saw the possibility that felt good, but at the same time, you're conflicting with the idea that that's not something that you learned. That you.
Oh, trust me, that moment it did not. I mean, it did not feel good. Like that orgasm did not feel good. because I think I entered the experiment biased. I was like, surely I'm going to try this, get it out of my system, not like it, and go back to right.
Yeah,
and like the opposite happened. I had where it took me by surprise, and I was like, oh gosh, like maybe I do like this, you know?
Yeah. What now?
What now?
Yeah.
What now?
So what were your concerns then?
I think it really was like letting down my family. I think that's a big one.
It's very important for us, and that's the reason why you're talking to us here. Is I think that's a collective thing that we keep hearing.
Like, I even asked myself, I was like, should I just be straight until they die? Like, do you know what I mean? And like, should I just like get married and have the kid and like fulfill all of that, and then eventually the kid will be 18 and I'll get to have the life I want? And I was like, wait, what am I saying? Like that, I can't do that. Like, but I thought it. I certainly thought it.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't think it, right? And that's how strong that, I don't know, that Chinese idea of filial piety is so strong. That idea of duty is so ingrained in our cultural DNA. It's in us that it was really hard for me to fight. And I guess in a way I had practice, right? Like coming out as an actor was sort of practice for me coming out. Because I was already like, in a way, I mean, I say this funnily, but like in a humorous way, but I was in a way already letting them down. To let them down again, by coming out and being gay, like was a lot easier. That's why I would say it was easier,
So you've gone through it once already.
Right. You're like, oh yeah, I've already let them down once. Like, they can't fall much farther.
What was the coming out process like for your mom then? You shared a bit about your dad.
It's interesting. My dad took it much harder. My mom, because she worked in fashion, she was surrounded by gay people all the time. And so for her, it was a little easier. She really is the American dream to me. She came to America in the 70s. She didn't even know how to sew, and she started working in the garment factories of Chinatown, eventually learning how to sew, eventually learning, taking herself to night school to learn pattern making, to learn all of that stuff. Eventually, by the end of her career, before she retired, she had worked for everybody: Ellen Tracy, Anne Klein, Burberry, Isaac Mizrahi. She retired working for the Olsen twins on their line, The Row. She helped the Olsen twins start their line, and she had done shows for them in Milan and in Paris. I mean, she was really somebody that was, one of these folks that really made the fashion world tick in New York. People would go, call Judy. You know what I mean? Like that was, she was that person that when people were in a bind, they called her. And I know there were a lot of people who were very sad when Judy retired. When Judy decided to retire, they were like, oh, what are we going to do without Judy? So many people said that to me. And it made me so proud that my mom was that, for a community. But she got it. She's had to work with straight designers, gay designers, and they were her bosses, So for her, she was much more accepting. And I remember her saying to me, it's going to take your dad some time. And at some point, it'll be great. We'll all be able to go on a vacation together as one big happy family or something. It's just going to take a little time. And so I tried to heed her advice as much as I could and be as patient as I could with my dad. And it's interesting, my dad being somebody who, again, and you have to sort of recognize all the different forms of love, right? And I remembered my dad having gone from somebody who was sort of rude to Jimmy and like really writing him off and not being very nice to him. I remember there was one day he calls me from Costco, and my parents will bulk shop for themselves, but if they have anything left over, they'll shop for me. And I remember my dad was like calling me from Costco. He goes, Telly, there is a sale on apples. And he's like, do you need apples? And I said, yeah, sure, Dad. Like, buy the apples and I'll eat them. He's like, okay, does Jimmy eat apples? Like, he thought enough to ask, knowing that we were living together, would Jimmy like apples? Like, and I felt like that was the turning point. I said, okay. And now they're fine. Now that I've been with Jimmy, now we are really one big happy family. But it took some time. It took almost a decade for us to get there,
Wow.
Okay, everyone loves a good Costco story, don't they? Seriously though, What a sweet gesture of acceptance from Telly's father. I mean, I was tearing up a bit at that one.
I know, me too. It's so sweet. I would be interested to hear stories from our listeners about how their families or workplaces show acceptance and support.
Well, they can share their comments about this conversation with Telly. Just email us at pridetalk@nap.org, or they can even call us and leave a voice comment. Our number is 4197-PRIDE5. And of course, you can find all this information on the show notes and our website, pride.nap.org.
And a quick shout out to NAP, the National Association of Asian American Professionals, a nonprofit organization that cultivates and empowers Asian and Pacific Islander leaders through leadership development, professional networking, and community service. Check them out at nap.org.
And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the Pride Talk podcast and join us for our next episode where Telly shares his thoughts on Asian representation, his experience of being Asian and gay in the theater world, and what it was like as an out gay actor being cast as the lead in Disney's Aladdin on Broadway. Join us next time as we continue the conversation with the extraordinary Telly Leung. Until then, remember this: representation matters. So be seen, be heard, be loud, and be proud. The opinions expressed on Pride Talk are solely those of the host and guest and do not represent the views or opinions of our individual employers, NAP, or our sponsors.